Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode.
Welcome back to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. Today, we are going to dive back into the world of education for a little bit and talk about SuperDville, a social emotional learning curriculum for kids ages 7 to 13 with learning differences. And we are here with Peggy Stern, CEO and founder of SuperDville. So Peggy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here.
So I always like to dive into the inspiration and the story first. And I was really drawn to SuperDville when I had heard about it because I taught middle schoolers, so, up to age 13, 14, usually with learning differences. But was there a specific story or inspiration behind SuperDville's creation and mission?
Definitely. It's very personal. I'm dyslexic. And, because I was a dyslexic child in the 60s, there was very little that was known in schools. And I just was incredibly lucky in that my grandmother was in the field of education. And so I was the youngest of many kids. And she noticed that I was just not getting certain things from children's books. And she knew about the signs of dyslexia. And so she took me at age 5, which in that day and age was incredibly young. I mean, even now it would be considered young, to one of her sort of star pupils who had set up a tutoring company. Later, this woman who became my tutor said that she just was humoring my grandmother, thinking, oh, this is just, Gladys worrying. This child is too young. And she said that after 20 minutes with me, she absolutely knew that I was dyslexic without a formal evaluation even. So then based on that, I was formally evaluated because back even in that day, all the knowledge was there of how to evaluate, the Orton Gillingham and all of that existed. So I was, diagnosed and identified as having dyslexia. And I would go to school in the daytime and nobody knew much or did anything special for me. And then afterwards, 3 times a week in the beginning, I would go and meet with Dorothy, who then I called Mrs. Pace, but then she became a dear friend as a grown-up. And, it was tough. I mean, it was really like having school and then school. And luckily, though, Mrs. Pace was truly Mary Poppins. I mean, she made it creative and fun and just handled the emotional side of what I was going through, the frustration, the lack of confidence, the wanting to just give up, and all those things. And so I think I always felt, after working with her for many years, I became a reader. I was doing well in certain subjects in school, not in everything. I was uneven. And I just really felt I owed it all to her and my grandmother. And so I think I felt this sort of sense of what if I hadn't had that? What would have happened to me? And that made me look out into the world, of course, and see what was happening and want to give back. So I always felt that I was going to do something. Didn't know what, but I wanted to do something. And then I had 2 kids, and of course, I watched them like a hawk. And, my son, because I believe in early intervention, and my son did not have any signs. He did actually, though, have anxiety disorder at a young age and got early intervention help through the Board of Ed in New York. And so I learned a lot about sort of the emotional growth of a young person through him. And then with my daughter, I saw the signs very young. What was interesting is then raising a child, who was born in 1996, scarily not enough had changed. I mean, certainly some things had changed, some really good things, which was more parents were organized and aware, and there were lots of beautiful things like that. But in other ways, the school system and the sort of lack of real intervention for kids was shocking. And So then I knew, okay, it's time. And I was all that while as an adult being a documentary filmmaker. And really, it was thanks to Mrs. Pace teaching me what my strengths were that helped me identify that even though I couldn't spell and I did become a reader, but, writing was very hard for me, I was a storyteller. And so I became a documentary filmmaker. And I actually went on to, with a wonderful animator, win an Academy Award. And when that happened, I then realized, okay, I need to really leverage this and do something about, what I call learning differences, but learning disabilities and dyslexia and the whole world of this. And so I thought initially it was going to be a documentary. And I started doing that and was talking to HBO, who I had done this last film with. I won't go into all of that, but basically there was this sort of moment when I was talking to a fellow dyslexic, an adult, who was telling me about his son who also had dyslexia. And he said, I'm in New York City and he's so lucky because he's going to a special ed school specifically for kids with learning disabilities. And yet he comes home and he's often just, wants to give up. He's feeling just how hard it is to learn how to read, which he sees, his sibling learning so easily. And I wish there was something I could do. Here, I know this. I lived it as a dyslexic. And I wish there was a way we could sit down together and have a conversation. And something went off in my brain that I did not need to make a documentary for adults. I wanted to do something for kids and something that kids and parents could watch together. And that was really the seed of the whole idea of how, SuperDville evolved as it is today.
I'm so impressed that your grandma, going back, was able to identify and diagnose, because even now, with all the resource and information that's out there, people still don't get diagnosed that early, or, evaluated that early, I should say, not diagnosed, but evaluated that early. That's really impressive.
I mean, that's the thing, is that kids could be identified a lot earlier. There's so many screeners out there. And what was so interesting, I mean, obviously she was in the field and trained, but what she noticed was the book was a book about the months of the year. And she said to me years later, well, your siblings, I read it once or twice, and then they knew the months of the year. They knew the sequence. I read it to you 100 times, and you still didn't know the sequence. And I still struggle with the months of the year. I have to go to the beginning. It's the sequencing of that is very hard for me. And she just said it was so clear that you were very verbal. You were clearly able to do all these things, and you could not for the life of you remember that. And then I started noticing you couldn't remember the days of the week. So there were all these sort of things that went into the more formal evaluation that someone would have given me that she picked up on.
It's great that it was done so early. I'm also a big advocate of early intervention, if possible, to make things easier in the long run. I've seen the impact of students not getting evaluated until middle school, and how they've gone through their entire school experience so far thinking there was something wrong and not realizing that they just needed to learn a different way. So I think that's so great that you had that access early on.
And it's a lot of why we started SuperDville starts its curriculum with third grade. And that's because that's often when in public school, especially the big test comes and kids are left back and there's the first sort of formal evaluation. Now, of course, I think it would be great if there was earlier evaluations going on to just identify what kind of learners kids are. But that can be such a hard moment for the kids who, do badly on parts of those tests. And so that's part of why we felt like, okay, well, this is a critical moment for a lot of kids.
And actually leading into that, I'm super big on, the alignment and the research that goes along with platforms for students. So I noticed SuperDville is aligned both with the CASTLE framework for SEL, which is, heavily documented in schools now, especially with all the focus on SEL, as well as science-based reading instruction. Can you speak to how the program is aligned with both of those frameworks or ideas?
So, of course, we, did a lot of research. When I came up with the idea, I then was able to go and start talking to educators and say, all right, I'm the filmmaker and can take what research you helped me kind of identify as being critical and turn it into the stories and the things that kids will enjoy, but it has to be based on the research. So basically with Castle, I mean, they had identified, and there's this, Castle wheel where they talk about the 5 most important things that, I mean, I think that it's funny because, of course, I think that there's more than 5 that get discussed all the time. What the researchers I worked with, and particularly Dr. Melissa Orkin, who was from Tufts, and she had been doing research and work specifically on social emotional learning and how it related to kids with learning disabilities. So she had, in her dissertation and her ongoing research, been looking at how there needed to be some additional themes or SEL competencies added, such as, belonging, perseverance. And so with her help, we really identified, okay, what will be the themes that we should focus on? And then I worked with psychologists and other people to identify, what are going to be the age appropriate kind of messages around those themes. So that was really how we aligned with Castle, is that we made sure that we were dealing with the themes that were considered critical for social emotional learning, and that we did it in an age appropriate way. And then in terms of, the science of reading, I mean, there's a few ways to talk about it, but one is, just like the science of reading is explicit in terms of how it teaches reading, right? Which, of course, as somebody who went through Orton Gillingham and all, that, to me, I don't know how else you would teach someone who is struggling with reading. It seems kind of common sense. And that it's also multisensory. So you can try to get at, different types of learners and their strengths of how they're going to take in information. So we do the same. Social emotional learning doesn't always do this, but SuperDville is both explicit in how we sort of make sure that not only in the videos are themes explicit, but in the curriculum that we give the teachers that's right there on the site. So the discussion is completely helping kids name what is going on. And then all the activities that are aligned with the themes are multisensory. They're very much about, making sure that any child will find something that they will shine in, whether it be that one activity is more art-based and another one might be more hands-on building type activity. And then also there's a lot of repetition. So with SuperDville, we have an episode and then we have 4 activities that go along. So if you were going to do the full curriculum as it's laid out, the idea is you can either show the episode 4 times, which many kids like because, of course, it's 5 minutes and they love seeing them, or you show it, and for the older kids, maybe, they don't want to see it as often. You spread out doing the activities on that theme. So you're not doing it all in just one lesson and moving on to the next theme. There's repetition to make sure that kids are sort of taking this into their psyche, their body, they're, really having a chance to absorb it. So I would say that that's similar to the science of reading philosophy. And then, I think that inherent in the whole idea of social emotional learning and what SuperDville is doing is that it's trying to build up the confidence and strategies for kids who might be struggling, not necessarily only because they have a learning difference. It might be for other reasons, that English isn't their first language, or, that they're struggling with reading, let's say. And so by helping them become stronger learners, by their developing the sense of confidence, they're going to be more empowered when they approached a new kind of learning, like the science of reading. When a teacher starts giving them new content in a new way, what SuperDville does is give them hopefully the confidence to approach it and stick with it.
I appreciate that explicit approach. I taught Orton Gillingham and multisensory reading for, a good chunk of my career as a teacher. And I know the power that explicit instruction had on my students. And I know for a fact our SEL program that we used did not do that for students. I remember taking that chunk of time out of every week, and then the next week would be something else. And there wasn't that time to, really internalize those themes and bring it into practice and, kind of go over it over and over again. Like the next week came, we were moving on to something else. So I appreciate that SuperDville has that explicit instruction, really allows students to kind of work and internalize each theme as you move through the curriculum.
Yeah, and the activities are different. I mean, they're very different, and the kids can get at the theme in a completely different way. And that's why teachers tell us that they show the videos again often, because kids get something different out of it. So that repetition is important, and video lends itself to that. I think as someone who needed that repetition in my own life, I think I approach this based on what the research told us and the researchers told us, and also my own personal experience of there's going to be repetition, but we better make it fun. We better make it something that the children will enjoy doing.
And I like the short chunking of the videos too, because I know I have a hard time watching anything for an extended period of time, but because I think you said 5 minutes, you can watch that over and over again. And you can get something out of it each and every time. It's not a, 45-minute session. You could watch this multiple times in one session and get different things out of it. The videos actually include real kids with learning differences, right? I had read that on your website.
Yes. So that's a really key part of what I'm very proud of with SuperDville, and was just the most incredible experience for me, was that because I come from documentary filmmaking, I had a lot of confidence in using real kids, because one, a lot of kids with learning differences tend to be creative and have different strengths. Not always. They, can have strengths in different areas, but I just had a feeling we'd be able to find a good, strong group. And we worked hard to have a very diverse group, so kids could see themselves no matter what, racial background, and just have the diversity of the cast reflect the diversity of our society. But the kids all have either dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, dysgraphia. One of the criteria in the audition was you have to like to perform. You don't have to have had any experience, but know that you like to perform and that you're willing to be public forever on the web about having a learning difference. That was a big one. And that is one of the big changes that had happened since my day, is that there were parents who were willing to let their kids be public, because the kid might not even understand totally the ramifications. But I was worried that there would be parents who would say, well, I'm not sure, and this could, but no, there were some amazing, 70 kids showed up for the first audition for the elementary school episode. So that was pretty incredible. I thought there'd be 10. I was worried. The real kids added a lot to, I think, the authenticity of these videos, to some of the content, because they would say, hey, wait a minute, that's not what I would say, So they had their say. These scripts were written by professional script writers, all of whom had a learning difference in one way or another. So there was a connection. But the kids had, lots of creative input.
I appreciate and I'm applauding the authenticity, because that's such a big piece. And I know I always go back to middle school, and they could sense out really quickly if something wasn't authentic to their own experiences. So I love that you actively went out and found actual kids with a learning disability from all different walks of life and experiences. I think that really would have engaged my students and helped them relate a little bit more. And maybe even, I was always encouraging self-advocacy as we were moving into the 8th grade year and they were attending IEP meetings and starting to advocate for themselves in class. It would have been great to show my students other kids who are openly talking about having a learning disability. And, it may have helped them feel a little bit more comfortable advocating for themselves.
And that's one of the themes throughout every grade. We have a video that deals with self-advocacy, because it's so important. And really, it's important for all learners. The peer-to-peer part of SuperDville is really critical. And there's some wonderful peer-to-peer programs out there that, local communities start, or, there's other programs that use peer-to-peer mentoring. And what we, in a sense, did by using real kids was sort of create a way to do that. Instead of one-to-one, it's a video to potentially, many, many, many kids. And we ended up doing something that I love on the site, which are, along with the episodes, there are also tips. And the tips are where I really took the kids and had them talk directly into the camera. And, I would ask them questions based on their own lives and my knowing some of their stories. And they told very specifically things that would be helpful to kids in terms of having a learning difference. So I think the tips are really great on the site.
I didn't even realize that it did that. I don't know why I didn't notice it looking at the website, but that's really awesome.
Well, we talk about it, but you have to go in and really have subscribed to be able to see that that's part of each grade. And then the tips themselves have activities that go along with them too. And I have to say that the videos, which I absolutely adored making, and had a fantastic director who worked with me who was dyslexic, and it was incredible. But the curriculum is really important. And that was all done with teachers. I mean, classroom teachers who had experience with special ed helped write all the curriculum. We worked with Hunter College in New York and, various different teachers from Boston. And I really feel like the video kind of brings everyone together, whether it's a parent and a child who are watching it, a tutor, a guidance counselor, or a classroom, and a teacher with a group of kids. Because then there are these discussion points. And so then you watch something, you discuss it, but then you have to do the activity, hopefully, because it helps every child bring it into their own experience and make it personal and gives them a memory.
And that actually leads perfectly into, I taught in resource pullout classes, but I also co-taught where it was my students, or I should say our students, me and the co-teacher. Some had IEP, some had 504, some didn't have any formalized plan, but we were all together in one room. How do you think the curriculum can help to foster an inclusive environment so that way it can be utilized in all classrooms, not necessarily just a resource or a pullout class?
Well, honestly, I can answer this question from what has happened. It's not just sort of my thought about it, because we released SuperDville actually with the original elementary school episodes right when COVID started. That was not by intention. It was just what happened. So because of what was going on in schools, we did not charge. We just thought, okay, this is going to be research and, sort of like our chance to get data, and we'll just let it be out there for free. And in that time, it was being used obviously on Zoom, but we are a completely Zoom accessible resource. And it was being used in general ed all the time, it turned out, because, the themes are relatable. All kids can relate to them. The themes of the episodes are, confidence, procrastination. That's a big one. Self-advocacy, as we discussed, stress. Third grade, they're beginning to have tests, and not just the big test that often they have, but, more testing. I think that they would use the episodes in a general ed setting. And the fact that the kids are identifying, it's at the beginning of every episode that it's identified that the children in this all have a learning difference, said in the voice of a child, meant that it was a step towards building empathy. The kids would go, wow, wait a minute, they're going through things just like me. So I think that is how teachers have used it. And it's been really successful. It was not actually our intention necessarily, but because that happened, we now have real data that it works really well in general education.
That is great, because the empathy piece is always so huge. It's always one thing to get my students to self-advocate and feel comfortable, advocating for what they needed in the classroom, but then also having their peers understand what they were going through and make those connections. So I like that. It may not have been the intention, but that's what it's doing through SuperDville. Starting that at a young age especially, you have to build up so much empathy, and it's so much easier to connect, peer to peer, regardless of whether somebody has a learning difference or not.
Exactly. And I think the fact is that, for instance, we have an episode called Stress, and I went and tested all these episodes way before they ever went out on the web. And I would go to different schools, and I was actually at a school where a child raised their hand and said, I think this should be called Stress Mess. And that is the title. It was such a good title. In that episode, all kids can relate to the idea of being overwhelmed by your homework, maybe for different reasons. And so that discussion can be really fruitful. So for the child who's overwhelmed, none of the episodes bang anyone on the head about having a learning difference. Some of them are more specific to, there's one where a child says, I wish I was more like other kids and I didn't have dyslexia. Okay, so that is a very specific story where they then go to this funny mad scientist who compares two brains, and it's all done in a kind of very fun way, but it's trying to show that, everybody's brain looks the same on the outside. It's just the wiring sort of in the inside. And it's all just great food for discussion. And I think that's why in general ed, it's so successful.
You talked a little bit about the data showing that it was effective in gen ed classrooms. I know that there were some pilot studies that were done with SuperDville across schools in the US and Canada. What are some of the key takeaways from the pilot studies that you've done with the curriculum, aside from the fact that, it shows that it's effective in a general ed classroom?
There were very specific questionnaires. And I mean, it was great because we got on average 8 out of 10, from all of them. And it was in 17 different states besides Canada. So it was really quite a geographic spread. And then there were some specific things that have been, we incorporated in how we revamped, how we laid out. I mean, there was nothing major, but for instance, somebody said we wish there was more resources on the site of just if we wanted to go further with learning, about a certain topic, or how could we use this with parents? And that led us to setting up that any teacher who has a subscription can add on parent for every child. So a household, basically, for free. And so they can add on an account and give the parents of their class access to SuperDville so that triangle of the parent, teacher, and child can be accessed, because then, the parents can learn some of the same language. I mean, it's a little bit like the thing of new math, and parents are like, wait a minute, what is all this? Well, I think that's true also with just how do I tell my child about stress? Like, what is the language I should use? So, I mean, I think that parents being able to have access to this curriculum and see what the lesson plan is and have a discussion with their child can be really important. So that was a takeaway that, we got that we really incorporated. I would say, so those were some of the main things. Another thing was, in terms of parents, was we put everything into as many languages as we could afford at the time, so that if the curriculum is sent home, it's in Mandarin, it's in Spanish, the whole curriculum is in Spanish, the videos as well. So we really tried to make it as accessible as possible. But the nice thing was that we got all the feedback was that the lesson plans and the layout of SuperDville is incredibly clear, and that it is amazingly easy to use. And that is not true of all SEL curriculum. I mean, the feedback that we had been hearing was that, there's some great programs out there, there's no doubt about it, that are, more mainstream for K through 12, but they take a lot of training or teacher sort of learning curve. And it's hard for the teachers to add that in. And SuperDville, the teachers can get the subscription. There's a tutorial. They can watch the tutorial. It really is, 1, 2, 3. You can kind of learn how to do it. We offer more training and stuff, but it is extremely easy to use. And so the feedback was that that people were really happy with that.
That's a huge piece. As somebody who has trained on different SEL programs, knowing how long it's taken to implement programs, the ease of use is a big factor. Aside from the fact that it's awesome that you're linking in the parents and the caregivers, because that's also something that I feel like even just general curriculum programs don't often provide. Like, okay, yeah, you could look at a report sometimes, but having those shared resources that parents could also access, that's a huge piece that has to be so helpful for the home to school connection.
It's really important, clearly from the research. And then the other piece is that, I think that social emotional learning came when I started thinking about SuperDville. I had honestly never heard the term. I came more out of, I guess, the era where they were talking about the whole child. That was maybe more the term. But all I know is that my wonderful tutor seemed to be using common sense. It was just sort of what would help this frustrated child stay engaged. Well, maybe I should see how she's feeling today, or maybe I should talk to her. There was just a lot of things like that. So I was sort of basing my idea a little bit on my own experience. And then I came upon learning about PASL and social emotional learning. And obviously I was like, oh my goodness, this makes a lot of sense. And I think what I'm thinking of fits into this. And fast forward, because we took a long time to research this. This was not done overnight, this project. There really was a number of years that went into it. And, now it seems like there's a lot of controversy around the country. Some states are not sure that they want SEL in the classroom, other places too. I mean, all of that's going on. And I just feel like I almost sort of try to just say, well, I just think that, it's clear that I know I needed and my daughter needed to have a way of understanding what, our strengths were, understanding how we could learn best. That's one of the things that's unique about our sort of targeted SEL, is that we're focusing on that piece. But we also are, the studies are showing, I mean, there was a big study done at the Yale Child Study Center, and they did this big study with 6,000 kids where they were able to really show the positive effects of students who have been involved in social emotional learning in K through 12. And it was over their academic lifespan. And I think there's something like 11% gain. They've showed, really important things that make it clear that this should be part of any child's experience through school. And then what we're saying is that kids who have learning differences need it all the more. I mean, we just cannot leave them out of the equation. And they might need certain things done a little differently for them, certain emphasis. And so that's, I think, what we provide. So what we, like to say is a school can have Ruler or, Second Step, some of the other big social emotional learning curriculums that are out there, and they still can have SuperDville. Mm-hmm. They're not mutually exclusive. I mean, we are focusing on third grade because it's so critical in the life of a child who's learning differently, because that's when they start to often be falling behind. Mm-hmm. So it's very important that they start understanding how their brain works and not identify themselves, like what we like to say is we're strength-based. We're trying to help children understand that. And so, we started with third grade, and then we've gone through sixth grade because that's the big transition to middle school. And we've heard that teachers use SuperDville in second grade. They use it in seventh grade. I mean, and, in time, we would happily keep going and do seventh and eighth grade. I think by high school, it's very different. Kids need something very different. And we would, potentially do something animated maybe for kindergarten and first grade. But third to sixth seem critical to get done right away. We just don't want to lose another generation. I don't want another generation of kids growing up. I can't tell you how many adults I have met with now that I've been in this work who have dyslexia or ADD. And we could be in our 40s, our 50s, our 60s. We all share similar dreams, literally like nightmares, reoccurring things that we, it's just ridiculous. I mean, the baggage that we carry is so similar. I just don't want another generation of kids growing up like that. I think it just doesn't need to happen. We have all the information. We know what needs to happen for kids. So, SuperDville is just one step towards that. There's lots of dedicated, amazing people out in the school system, whether it be, tutors, special ed teachers like you, who have been doing wonderful things. And I hope something like SuperDville, which is what we've heard, is people saying, oh, I wish I'd had this 10 years ago, which always makes me happy to feel like we've hit the mark and are really giving people something useful to use.
Mm-hmm. And that's always appreciated, I think, in the classroom. And it's clear that there have been a lot of successes that have come out of using it so far. And I know you talked a little bit about kind of where you'd like to go in the future, with expansion and things like that in terms of ages. But my last question for you is, what are some plans that SuperDville has for expanding its reach and further growing the curriculum?
Well, one thing that's really exciting is that someone approached me about 2 years ago, a small publisher, a wonderful company called Simple Word Books. And the head of it was similar to me in that she had a child with dyslexia and ended up, creating decodable books. And so she wanted to do something about social emotional learning. And so we brainstormed and we came up with a book that's called The Teacher's Toolbox for Every Child, Activities to Build Children's Strengths Through Art, Improv, and Conversation. And it's for ages 7 to 13. And I'm just really excited about it, really proud to have my name on a book as a dyslexic. It's very meaningful to me. And so the themes in the book are identifying emotions, stress, perseverance, curiosity, gratitude, self-acceptance, confidence, and self-advocacy. It's a deeper dive. It goes along with the website. And so if you go to SuperDville.com, you can obviously learn about how you can subscribe and have access to all the videos, and then how to buy the book, which is on Amazon and also on the site of the company I mentioned. I think that that's just an exciting direction that we were able to go in, and we've talked about maybe next, though parents can use this book, that we might do something even more specifically for parents. And then the other thing we're working on resurrecting, we did it during COVID, and we've gotten a lot of requests to bring it back, is something called Super D Kids, which was Zoom groups that were sort of after school or in the evening for kids with learning differences from all over the country who would be put into groups where you don't know anyone. So it's not people from your school. And we use the videos as discussion starters, and it's 8 weeks, and it was amazing. And so it's a chance for kids to really talk in a supportive environment where they also get to realize, oh my goodness, someone in Montana is going through what I go through. And I'm, from Long Island. This is incredible. And it just was a very wonderful thing to see what came of these groups. So we're working on bringing those back. And so there's a bunch of exciting things in the works.
The book is exciting, and I'm going to make sure, in addition, obviously I'll be linking the website in the show notes, but I will also link to the book as well, because that would have been great to have in the classroom for my students, especially in my reading intervention class. It would have been awesome to have. And the idea of the connections is really great too. So I'm excited to see everything that SuperDville continues to do as you grow and expand in the future. And thank you so much, Peggy, for joining us on the show today and telling us all about SuperDville. For our listeners, like I said, everything will be in the show notes. So make sure you pop into your description, or if you are a transcript reader, it is also at the bottom of the transcript, so you can access it there as well. But thank you again, Peggy. I appreciate you being here with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.